Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel. So I'm going to take on an interesting twist on this concept of the sandwich generation as it might apply to people who've been enduring sort of multi-generational narcissistic abuse. So this term, sandwich generation, has typically referred to a generation of people that still have children that need some looking after, but also older parents that need looking after, and are people who also are often may also be working. So these are folks who are being, and they're usually women, but they're people who are being pulled in every direction: work, kids, older parents, and they literally can't get a moment of peace or rest, and it's really taking a toll on their health. But it came to my attention through some questions and comments folks have made that there's sort of a different kind of a sandwich generation phenomenon that has arisen amongst people who are surviving narcissistic abuse, especially those who experienced narcissistic abuse in childhood. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent or parents, you had to learn to keep your needs quiet, to not be seen, to not be heard, to have your emotions, aspirations, and you shamed and silenced, and basically be invalidated at every turn. You learn to be somewhat invisible. Then you grow into an adult. Perhaps you get into a relationship and have children of your own. You may even be fortunate and not marry or have children with a narcissistic person. You may have actually done a decent job by your children, or so it seems, and actually did have children who grow up and individuate and become their own people, and they felt seen and heard, and they go into their futures and they become their own people. It happens all the time. Many survivors turn that ship around. Or another option would be you get into a relationship with a narcissistic partner and you have to co-parent with that narcissist, and you may have a child who may also have narcissistic tendencies, and then you get to experience invalidation and narcissistic abuse part 2 or maybe part 3, depending on the quality of your marriage or your relationship. Either way, you experienced it in childhood. You did your best in adulthood to get it right, and yet you find that in adulthood, especially probably in your 50s and 60s, what you find is that as you have adult children, you have to learn once again to ensure that your children can go into the world and become their whole and authentic selves, or you have to endure their bad behavior, which may be similar to what you had to endure as a child. Not pleasant. I've talked with many, many survivors about this who have told me stories like, my son had his first child, it's my first grandchild, I couldn't wait to spend time with my grandchild and my son and his wife, and then my son got transferred to another country. And I didn't feel I had the right to say anything. It was great for his career, but I did feel like I did not want for a minute to have him feel manipulated the way I felt manipulated by my intrusive narcissistic parent. So I didn't say a word, but I really felt this heaviness because I didn't want to not see the grandchild as much. On the other side is people have talked about having a narcissistic adult child, and not only is there then the remorse of what did I do wrong, and maybe not much. Temperament matters quite a bit when it comes to narcissism. I have witnessed some parents whose main liability honestly was that they praised their children too much or gave their children too much attention and too much adulation. Like, yeah, you don't even want to, unpacking that can be very challenging. There's many paths to narcissism. But either way, as now that your adult child is an adult, will have children that invalidate them, manipulate them, gaslight and shame and guilt them. For these survivors, feeling the same sensations and feelings that they had in childhood, having them again in adulthood with their own child, it feels like an absolutely nightmarish replay, a legacy that feels inescapable. And yet they are also mindful of how they're responding to their adult child, not wanting to lash out in the angry ways that their own parents did. Lots of people who grew up with narcissistic parents already have struggles with expressing their needs or with being seen. But when this results in having to remain silent when children are adults, to feel as though in wanting to be a healthier parent and a more mindful parent, many hurts get experienced. And it's easier for survivors in this sandwiched position to feel like they lost out on both sides. Breaking intergenerational cycles is really, really difficult. And the generation that steps in and rallies and tries to break these cycles is often the one that gets hurt the most. Now, if you have a narcissistic child, you may say, after all that, and the cycle is still here, and there's tremendous grief when that happens. But for those of you who had children who felt secure and seen and heard and are doing well and going forth into the world, it may mean sacrifices like not getting to live near them, or not seeing grandchildren, or not having the opportunity to enjoy this healthy space you've created in your life, because they're going to go on to live their life, but you can take some solace in that the idea that the cycle has now been interrupted. Experiencing narcissistic abuse by multiple generations on either side is really, really painful, and therapy, support, radical acceptance, self-compassion, and disengagement are often the only path forward. On the other side, recognizing that you have raised a healthier next generation, it's conceivable it may mean that you miss out on some experiences you hope to have, but you may feel an unpleasant sense of when is it my turn, or even feel sort of that you don't get to express yourself. It's a force of will for people who are survivors of narcissistic abuse to make it their turn, to let go of narratives, to cultivate healthy spaces, to balance that middle ground between grief and growth. The sandwiching from your own experience of childhood narcissistic abuse to raising your own children and either facing narcissism in at least one of your own adult children, or having to say goodbye to healthy children you raised to be their own people. It can feel like a lifetime of having to push your needs and feelings down. And it's kind of true. So finding safe spaces to talk about it and having it acknowledged does become so important. It's real. And it doesn't feel good to always have felt like you had to kind of clip your own wings so others around you could fly or at least get away with what they wanted to. But the sense I've gotten from folks is that they're like, I know, I don't want in that case of that son, I don't want my son to feel guilty for a minute. I want him to go. I want him to kill it. I'm going to miss my grandchild. But that sense of a whole childhood when the person could never speak and let their feelings be known with their parents, and now they're in adulthood and once again feel as though they cannot speak and let their feelings be known. So it's an interesting sandwiching when you're the generation that's trying to make the change. Thanks again.